Great. Thank you, Catherine. Well, it's great to be here with y'all today, talking about one of my favorite topics, which is sobriety, but also, managing sobriety within a workplace, as well as being a good community and leadership member to other people who may be sober or in recovery, in your workplace as well, and beyond. Hopefully, in the world, we could all be more empathetic, better community members to each other. So before we jump into a little bit about, things to think about when doing dry January or going into sobriety, or being a better leader for your team, I just wanted to share a little bit about myself. My name is Emily Holland, as we said. Pronouns are she, her, and hers. I do live in Boulder, Colorado most of the time, and I have been sober from alcohol since February 17th, 2020. I know Catherine and I were chatting a couple weeks ago and we were like, what is our date? We don't know what our dates are, but they're generally within the 16th or 17th, one of those numbers. I have a very cute rescue dog named Kata from Haiti. She is the best. And yeah, I'm a skier, hiker, probably not surprising. I live in Colorado. So all the things that you would think of someone doing in Colorado, I'm excited and down for. And my full-time job is being a freelance podcast producer and consultant. So I'm a big podcast nerd. And one of the things that I think the reason that Catherine and I connected a while ago was I've been vocal about being sober for essentially the entire time. And also had a podcast that I hosted and produced called Nature Untold podcast, which was connecting outdoor folks in the community of the outdoors to those recovery stories and really weaving those two together. So that's a little bit about me to give you some context of who the heck is talking to you at this current moment. But yeah, let's actually dive in. So our order of operations today, we're going to talk about sobriety in the new year. A lot of people use this opportunity of January to do dry January or just reconsider their relationship with different types of potential addictions. And it's an opportunity for everyone to just reset on what they really want their life to be. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and how I might thinking about that dry January or however, whatever you're choosing to do in this new year when it comes to sobriety and recovery. And then we'll talk about being sober or in recovery in the workplace and some things to think about there as a person in recovery or who is sober. How to be a better leader for people who are sober or going through recovery. We're going to talk a little bit about that, maybe share a couple don't do this stories as well that myself and Catherine have plenty of that we can share with you. And then we'll do a little Q&A, and we really want this. I know it is obviously being recorded, so want to be cognizant of that with what you're sharing. However, we want to be here for questions and answers for people who might want to speak up and talk a little bit about, what they're experiencing. And then I've created a list of some books and podcasts that hopefully will be helpful for yourself or maybe your leadership team to listen to, read, to really have a better understanding of what this world of recovery and sobriety looks like and how to be a better member of your community overall in that understanding. So with that, we'll talk first about being sober in the new year. And, we all know the terminology of dry January, I think, but for those who don't, it's essentially an opportunity. And I think it started in the UK, if I'm not mistaken, but people started to just take the entire month of January off from drinking, and it got the name dry January. So a lot of people take the opportunity after the holidays to just reset on the year, get a clear mind for building their new year. And that is what dry January is, if you're not familiar. So before I got sober, I did dry January every year for the maybe last 5 years before I got sober. And people always ask me about going into this month or going into a dry month, whether it be January or another one, and how to approach it with a way that you can get the most out of it. And so I come back to a really major thing that I hope people can think about and bring into their dry January, whether it be this month or do another dry month later in the year. But that is to really look at a dry month like this as a data finding mission. And I say that because a lot of people, especially around alcohol and other addictive substances, there's a lot of judgment involved in your relationship with that substance. And we know that, right? Those stigmas are real. They're out in the world. They're reiterated through all of our media. And so when we think about going into a dry month, I really encourage people to think about leading with curiosity and not with judgment of self. So an example of that is finding data and collecting data during your dry month is, oh, I am going to this event or I'm around this particular person, and it's really hard for me not to drink in that particular instance. What does that tell me about this event or this person or this action that I'm taking? Okay, well, I'm at a bar, so there's a bunch of people here who are drinking. That makes sense. Okay. So maybe the action from there is maybe for this month, I just won't go to events that are held at a drinking facility. And maybe with friends or people in your life, could be family members or partners as well, who may feel harder to be around without drinking. What does that tell you about that relationship? Maybe it means actually this relationship was really rooted in drinking. So I wonder if there's an opportunity for us to start a new part of our friendship where we actually just go do fun activities together, or we get coffee or tea or in the morning or something like that. So this is all good data for you to take in and to reflect on without judgment, and to just really almost like it's something that you're analyzing at work, right? Like almost like you're looking at a spreadsheet and you're like, what does this all mean? What are all these numbers here? So thinking about it in that way takes a lot of the judgment out of that particular month, and gives you a lot of things to work with to decide how you want to move forward with your relationship with alcohol or whatever other substance you're dealing with in that situation. Another thing to just mention with the leading with curiosity instead of judgment here is that it is okay. I'm going to give you permission. It's okay if you don't make it through the month. If you aim to do the whole month and you get to January like 9th, let's say, and you have a drink or whatever the substance is that you're trying to move away from for the month, that is another data point for you. And it might be a more serious data point than, oh, I can't be at a bar right now, or I don't like this person, this friend, as much as I thought I did. It might be a more serious reflection for you to think about, okay, I thought this was going to be a lot easier and it's not. So what does that mean for the reality of my relationship with this substance? And that might lead to more clear action items for you of like, oh, maybe it would be helpful to be part of a community that talks about this, or reach out to people in my community that I know are sober. Those are really good things to think about as well. Obviously, like it's great to go through the entire month. And if you go through the entire month, great. But again, don't be punishing towards yourself if you get to a certain point and it is not available to you to continue. Just use that, like I said, as a data point to collect to move forward in decision-making process. And I know it sounds very work oriented, right? It's like data collection, decision-making process. And that is on purpose. Like treat it as if this is a project that you're working on. That's my perspective on dry January and just starting the year off in that way. And then, as we move forward, we'll talk a little bit about being better leaders for people who are in this scenario of potentially trying to get sober or who are sober. But if you aren't in this scenario right now where you're trying to do a dry month or whatever that looks like, I would just use this information and have more compassion towards the people around you who you know might be going down this path this year, and really try to be more understanding if someone is not fitting into, how you've always known them. So that's what my thoughts on the sobriety in the new year. And we can certainly do some questions at the Q&A. So if you do have questions, we can talk about that then. But next, I'd really love to share some fun stories. And I say fun pretty sarcastically in this instance. So being a sober person in a workplace can be rather challenging. Depending on your workplace, and some are certainly way better at this than others, there may not be a clear vision or rhetoric from leadership about how to communicate around drugs and alcohol and other addictions. And therefore, there might be a lot of weird things that people say to you, or things that happen at company meetings that are completely inappropriate for a recovered or sober person. So I'll share a couple examples from my past corporate life. And then, Catherine, maybe you can share a few if they come to mind. When I was newly sober, I think 2 weeks, I had stopped drinking. And I was out to dinner with a very large bank client, and this was an SVP of their strategic division. And with my 2 other colleagues there, who were considerably older than me, but very kind for the most part. And we were out to dinner at an Italian restaurant. What usually happens at Italian restaurants? People drink wine. And I kept having to tell the waiter to not keep filling up my cup, kept having to put my hand physically over the cup. And a colleague, a man, and this, not that that's important, but my male colleague said to me, "Oh, you're on your best behavior tonight, huh?" in front of the client. And that made me really uncomfortable, right? Like that indicated to that client that usually I go off the rails when it comes to drinking. And it just was a little reductive to what I was trying to do with my non-drinking. So that was not great. And looking back, I really wish that I said something, but it just wasn't appropriate at the time, and honestly, my level of maturity in the professional world for me to say something. So that's one fun story. Catherine, do you want to share one, and then I can share one?
Yeah, I think we both probably have a huge list of these, but the one that springs to mind for me first is this mandatory team building seminar that we all had to go to. It was like a games event where we all, you had to go, and it was during the workday. And I recall there being beer and wine in our refrigerator at the job site all the time. And I was maybe 3 months sober at this point, so still it's still a little spicy. And I was required to go to this event where everybody was drinking wine and beer around me. And I remember physically gripping the bottom of the chair so hard that it hurt my hands, because I was just trying to just get through this event. And I did eventually, I think I actually brought it up to the office manager and said, that was really hard for me. I said this maybe a year later. I said, it was really hard for me to go through something like that. And we really need to be mindful of how we're interacting with folks. But I felt very alone and very scared at that time because nobody else was there to support me. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I know I'm being very facetious when it comes to sharing fun stories, because in the moment, these are not fun, right? They are not fun. And because of the stigma and rhetoric around these types of things, there are a lot of people who still believe that you're being not fun if you don't drink, or that you're trying to bring people down, or whatever it is. And so we need to keep speaking up, essentially, to keep changing that narrative. However, I just want to acknowledge that these are very sarcastically fun. So another example, and we're sharing these examples because we know that some leaders or people who want to be leaders will be on this call, right? So these are things to avoid with your team as well. So Another example, which happened pretty frequently, is I worked at a company for a long time, a market research company, and we would have large, all hands, like everyone in the entire company, quarterly meetings, which I really looked forward to. There was awards, it was like really fun. But as I started to come to terms with my relationship with alcohol, I realized that every single person who wins an award gets a bottle of Veuve Clicquot, which is a very fancy champagne. And that didn't like really come up in my mind before I got sober. But once I did, I really noticed it and found it to be pretty problematic because there's no question on, oh, are you able to have this? Or no, we just hand it to you. There was no consideration for someone who might be in recovery or sober, or even someone who is struggling, and that is a way of normalizing their relationship with alcohol in a way. So there's a lot of things to consider there, and ways to do it way better. You know, don't we all want gifts that don't last for one night where you drink it and it's gone anyways? Like, I'd rather have a Yeti cooler like this, or a Bose speaker, something cool like that. So anyways, I just mentioned that as well. But when it comes to these like big meetings and gifts and stuff like that at workplaces, which always happen every year, how can we make sure that everyone feels really included and empowered in those meetings and engagements? So moving on. So being sober in a workplace can be challenging for sure. Obviously, there's a lot of drinking events that come with certain work cultures, so that will probably never be completely avoided, to be honest. So not much to do there, but there are some things that you can do to feel like you're prioritizing your recovery. So if you feel comfortable, and a lot of this is based on if you feel comfortable, speak about your experience to other people. Like everyone on my team knew that I was sober. And that's if you feel comfortable doing it. If that doesn't feel like a safe thing for you to do it because of your workplace environment or just where you're at in your recovery, totally understandable. But I do find that the more that you speak about it, the more people really start to acknowledge, like, hey, am I like making Emily uncomfortable? Maybe I should not joke about getting blackout drunk on Saturday. Just a thought. So the next thing is share your needs with your manager, your leadership team. Again, like if you feel comfortable doing this. So, everyone for the most part has one-on-ones with their manager on a weekly basis or bi-weekly basis. You might even have meetings with your manager's manager on a consistent basis as well. And you should bring these types of things up, especially if there's mandatory team events that might be coming up that you want to make sure are not centered around drinking or whatever triggering thing happens for you if you're a sober person in a workplace. So again, if you feel comfortable, feel free to bring that up to your manager. Like I said, like my manager and everyone on my team knew that about me. And I felt very, supported because of that. And they were very conscious of it. So thinking about that. And then if you have the ability to, and you don't even have to share that you are sober or in recovery, is just suggesting other types of work events that might even sound more fun to the team or to your manager that aren't centered around drinking. So you don't need to share that, oh, let's do something that's not centered around drinking. You could just bring up that maybe this next time I'm just trying to think of something, go to a pottery class. I don't know, something that doesn't involve drinking. And, that might be even better bonding for the team too. I would argue that it probably is better bonding because everyone is fully present in what you're doing. So that's a thought as well. The other thing is, some events are mandatory. Hopefully workplaces are moving away from that because that's just unbelievable, to be a mandatory work event when the last couple of years happened. Come on. That's my personal opinion. But if you need to leave an event because you're worried that you're going to drink or do drugs or whatever the trigger is, leave the event. Your health and the decisions that you make for yourself are way more important than a corporate work event. And I know if obviously that's like some of these are privileged statements, right? Like some people really need that job and they're really worried they can't get another job, or maybe they can't get another job for whatever reason. So there's nuance here, of course, but if you have the ability to excuse yourself, definitely do it if you need to. Um, and then this one's a little bit harder, and again, kind of rooted in a little bit of a privileged position. I want to acknowledge that, but oftentimes people ask me, what do I do if my friends don't want to hang out with me anymore if I'm sober? And I always say, get new friends, because those are not the types of people that you want in your life. You're making a personal decision for your health, and your friends aren't even trying to understand it and won't like give you any understanding or support. Who wants those people in their life? No one. They're not going to show up for you when you need them to. So I don't mean to be dramatic with this, but I kind of do at the same time, because this is the same thing with a workplace. If you feel like your workplace is making you go to events that are centered around drinking, is not understanding of what you need as a recovering or sober person, you should look for a new place, a new workplace that will give you the support that you need in that environment. So those are a couple things to think about just as far as being sober in the workplace. I know some of them are based in if you feel comfortable or not. So then hopefully the next thing we talk about for leaders will give a bit more context or help mitigate some of these from the jump upstream, so that you don't have to personally take on these things as a person in recovery. So okay, how to be a good leader around recovery and sobriety. So I will definitely send these over as well. So I know there's a lot of words on these slides. My like business, college professors would be very upset with me, but here we are. So when people struggle with recovery at work, it's often because their leaders are not being supportive or understanding of their needs. And this is not meant to be a judgment statement. It's just that if you have never experienced someone in your life go through sobriety or recovery or addiction or any of these pieces, there's really no reason for you to understand beyond your like general societal understanding, right? So take this as an opportunity to be curious about something that might be impacting a lot of your employees on your team or just colleagues that you work with. So just a few things to think about when it comes to being a better leader. So I was listening to a podcast. This is not my idea of EQ over IQ. So I don't remember who said this, but it was not me. EQ is emotional intelligence. IQ is obviously the smart one, intellectual intelligence or something like that. I don't know. But EQ is way more important as a leader, and not just with this sobriety thing, than it is if your like IQ levels are off the charts, right? So do you have the emotional capacity to understand someone, truly listen to them, try to hear what they actually need, and then give them what they need based on that, right? So it doesn't matter if you have all the answers. What matters is that you're willing to listen and understand and try to come up with a way to be more supportive of them moving forward. So even if a team member comes to you as a leader and says, we have all these mandatory events and they're all centered around drinking. We go to a bar, we go to a dinner, we go to a Red Sox game, or I don't know, but they're all centered around drinking being the major component. Can we do something differently? A person who has high EQ is going to say, wow, thank you for bringing that to me. I'm so glad that you felt comfortable coming to me with that. And what can we do to make this better? Are there ways that we can do better events or so that's a person who has EQ. IQ would be like, well, not everyone has addiction, so I don't think we're going to do that. Right? So just thinking about how you can really flex that emotional intelligence muscle a little bit more. A great leader who supports people who are in recovery or sobriety calls it out, and I'll explain what it is when they see it or hear it. So when someone on your team jokes about something destructive that they've done while they're drunk, that could be very triggering to someone in recovery. Or if people are laughing about it, it might minimize how they feel or make it reductive about their own recovery. If you are at an all hands meeting and the leader of the company makes a mention about it's 5 o'clock somewhere, or I really needed that drink, or whatever. Okay, as a leader, you need to call that out when you see it, because the only way that your team is going to feel supported and understood is if everyone at the organization is really on the same page when it comes to that. So bring it up to HR, bring it up to the actual leader that said something, and really try to help them understand why that's not okay. And these might seem like really small examples, but when you're at the beginning, especially of your recovery, these small examples, you look for these as reasons that you actually don't need to continue your recovery, right? You look for the normalization of the drug that you're taking as a reason that you just say, well, actually, you know what? Everyone does it, so I'm just going to keep doing it as an individual. So if you as a leader can help those get minimized in whatever way possible, then you are doing such a service for people who are in your organization and who are sober or in recovery. Yeah, so we've talked a little bit about this, so I'm not going to belabor it, but just organizing more events that are not centered around drinking or other triggers. So plain and simple, really try to do the best you can there. If you feel like the rhetoric at your company overall is not really like an understanding one of these types of issues, maybe start to casually bring it up to other leaders in your management meetings or in meetings with HR representatives or business partners that you have. How can you, maybe it's not with your direct manager, but sort of disseminate this information or make sure everyone is on the same page at your level. Thinking about those things and steps you can take there, again, a great service to the people who need to feel supported and understood. And then the last thing is like anything else, tons of leaders and managers read leadership books. How can I be a better leader? How can I make my team more motivated? How can I have better emotional intelligence? Okay, well, we also need to rotate books in about, okay, how do I, about understanding more about the sobriety journey, about the recovery journey, so that there is more compassion there about what's needed. You could argue too, like you should probably be reading lots of books about a lot of different things as a leader so that your emotional intelligence is continuously improving. But as far as sobriety goes, there's tons of books and podcasts and articles to read that make a big difference. If you just slowly start to notice and understand how pervasive these comments and events and things are, you can really be a catalyst for change, not only at your workplace, but in your larger community. And that is so appreciated by people who are sober and who really need people to speak up for them. I'll share a quick story with you. Earlier this year, this is not necessarily a workplace thing, but it just shows the impact of people speaking up and out. So earlier this year, I went to Lander, Wyoming. There's a rock climbers festival there every year, and it's a big event. It's 3 days. It's a bunch of rock climbers come to this tiny town in Wyoming, and there's a bunch of events. There's like an art show. There's a couple competitions. There's music and all kinds of stuff, speaking. And at every single event, there was no non-alcoholic option at all. And so afterwards, I was talking to my mentor who lives there and was talking about the event, how we thought it went. And I said, it was great, but if I was earlier on in my sobriety, I would probably have drank during that event, because I was made fun of for not drinking and just not given any opportunity to have any sort of similar option for a drink that people who were drinking did. And he came back to me a couple weeks later and he said, I reached out to the organizers of this event, and we're going to do things a little bit differently this year. Let's have athletic brewing, or let's have well-being brewing, like, at our event, or at our booth for the event. And I said, wow, thank you so much for doing that. And he said, yeah, I never noticed this stuff before I really was friends with you. And now I notice it all the time. And that really made me feel good, because, it's sometimes really like draining to talk about this all the time. But I just say that not as a pat on the back for me, but as a sort of overarching, like, these are the changes that can be made that are so small and take such small lifts that do so much for the people who are really struggling in our communities. So with that, hopefully that gives you some good ideas of taking it back to your own places of work, and can really understand how to do better for the people around us overall. But yeah, I have a little Q&A slide if anyone wants to chat. I haven't been checking in on anything, Catherine, but yeah.
I haven't seen any Q&A emerge, but certainly happy to take those conversations now if anybody has any comments, questions, words of wisdom. So go ahead and drop those in the chat. And what I think also is really useful here, Emily, is just the fact that, like, as leaders in our overall communities, right, we have a real responsibility to stand up for those people who may get tired of always having to advocate for themselves. And that's what I hear, that's really what PI is trying to stand for in a lot of ways. And I think that we think of it a lot of times in terms of, like, appearance or identity, but we don't necessarily dive into this aspect of, people's religious practices, or people's, sobriety journeys, or these mental health concerns. And so I'm really grateful that you brought that up. I think it's really important that we acknowledge that and honor it.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that, we talked about this before, Catherine, but diversity and inclusion is a really important part of any workplace. It always has been, but even more so now than it ever has been. And that usually includes things like race, things like sexual orientation, if we're lucky, and gender. Those are like the main three, I would say, that are usually included in that bucket. And those three are certainly, I would say, of highest importance in the current state. However, if we can just sort of think of them as like circles and expanding, those are the core. We need to focus on those first and foremost, prioritize those. But then outside of that, there's all these types of things that, like sobriety, that really should be included in that inclusion piece of D&I, right? It's how do we make sure that people feel included without, having to rehaul and change the entire culture of our company. So I think, certainly religion is more in the core, I would say, but there's all these circles that go out, and how can we make sure that those parts of inclusion are, for lack of a better word, included in those narratives and conversations and work and programs that are part of, overarching D&I initiatives.
Yeah, and it brings to mind just the fact that disability is such an important part that we often kind of look over. And I would consider this, I don't know, I feel like this might fall under that umbrella a little bit. And it's just something that's really important that we need to see moving forward. I have personally had some really positive experiences with managers that I disclosed this to. And I'm really lucky, because there was a place that I worked at that had keg in the break room, and after some of us kind of brought that up, they ended up taking the keg out of the break room, right? We're like, we don't think that's really right. So like, but my question to you is like, if you are in early sobriety, like you touched on this a little bit, but I'd like to hear more. If you're in early sobriety, or maybe you're trying to disclose this to your supervisor, do you have like maybe a script or some methodology? Like, how would I go about doing that so that I set myself up for success?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I certainly, like, I'm not a therapist or anything, or, a sobriety coach or anything like that. So I'm not registered. So I just want to share that first. Yep. But I would always say, first of all, if you are working with a therapist during this time, they can help you craft that language that makes it feel very true to your experience, and helps you express exactly what you need. But in my experience, just being direct is really important, and maybe even practicing saying this type of thing if you feel uncomfortable with it, but you still want to do it to like your partner or a friend or a family member, so that I know for me, if I have to go into what I deem a hard conversation, it doesn't matter how much I've thought about it. I might cry regardless. Like that's who I am. So if that's something that's hard for you, and you feel like any sort of like thing that feels like a conflict is going to make you get emotional and not enable you to get those words out as much as you would like, and practice it with your therapist or with your partner, whoever you can in your life that you really trust. And then as far as a script goes, I think that's definitely dependent on the person for sure. But for me, it was like I've stopped drinking. I no longer drink. At this point, I was already working remotely, so like the work events thing wasn't as hard for me. But I did go back for like sales kickoff and stuff, so that's challenging. But all to say, I'm a sober person. I don't drink anymore. Like I don't know what this I was really honest. I was like, I don't know what this journey will entail for me, but I just wanted you to know that I am a sober person now and I don't drink alcohol. And like they're so understand. I mean, I had a great manager. It sounds like you've had great ones too. Um, and she was so understanding of that situation and like almost loving in a way, like, showed up lovingly. Um, and then when I did go to sales kickoff and was like, okay, I'm going to bed. I don't want to be a part of this anymore. She would see me leave and be totally like, yeah, understanding. So I don't know that I have a script, but I think like practicing what you feel like is your full truth, in the way that you want to express it, to people around you first, if it's making you uncomfortable to think about doing that. Yeah.
I think that's really great advice. Part of the reason that I'm so passionate about this topic is because I got sober largely because of the contributions of people where I worked. Back when I was in my early 20s, there was the guy, Archie. I will never forget this young man. He was wonderful. We were both in our early 20s, and he would always joke. He was in AA. And maybe I should be mindful about that. Whatever. Nobody's going to know who this is. But anyway, he was in the program. And he's like, hey, have you ever thought of stopping drinking? Because I was displaying some like really hard, like bad behaviors, right? Like coming into work, just not ready to go. And he's like, have you ever thought about coming to AA? And I was like, oh, you're funny. Like I thought he was joking with me. And then 10 years later, somebody else like kind of said the same thing to me at my job. And I was like, y'all see something that I don't see, right? And so
Yeah.
I think having these conversations, like if those people hadn't been willing to have those conversations with me or plant those seeds at the workplace, right, I would probably have not taken this that seriously, because I've been like, oh, my friends, like whatever, my friends care about me, that's fine. But once I started being at risk of losing my job because people were noticing that I was displaying alcoholic
Yes.
behavior, now all of a sudden I took it a little bit more seriously. And so I want to say also that I think that this is a workplace appropriate conversation to be having with people,
Mhm.
and that if you're a manager and you're noticing something's kind of amiss with your employee, you could change someone's life by having that conversation with them. And it's very difficult, right? It's very uncomfortable. It's not the type of thing that we want to be doing, but it is something that could really really make a difference for someone, because it did for me. So yeah.
Oh, love that. That is so beautiful. Oh, I just got like, like
Well,
chills.
you just never know where these positive impacts are going to come from. And we think of the
Yep.
workplace as being a place where that's divorced from that human experience. And this is very much
Right.
a place where we can connect in that way. And I think it's useful to consider ways where to consider being prepared to have those conversations with your direct reports.
Definitely. Definitely. I love what you said. You don't know when you could save someone's life from having a hard conversation. That is so true in so many different ways. And we could go down a rabbit hole there. But the other thing I would say too, and something that we talked about, is you have no idea how many people are sober until you start saying that you either want to stop drinking or have stopped drinking, and then everyone comes out of the woodwork and they're like, "Oh yeah, I don't do that either," or "Yeah, my dad was in AA for 30 years, and I'm very familiar with that." And so it's not even just people who are sober, but people who have serious experiences with people who had addictions or were in recovery, have a really, really good understanding of what that might look like. So they will come out of the woodwork. They are there, even if it doesn't feel like they're there in the, current moment.
Yeah, this has been a delightful conversation. I don't see any questions. I do see some comments saying that this has been a terrific presentation. This is emboldening this person to talk a little bit more about these conversations in the workplace. So we're glad that it had that. We're glad that it had that effect on you. I do see someone, I see somebody else who just popped into the chat. It looks like we are just finishing up our conversation here, but we will make sure that you get Emily's information. Emily, how do we get a hold of you when we're ready to have more information about this? How do we listen to your podcast? Like what's the scoop?
Yeah, well, first of all, Brian, thank you, because that is really beautiful. And thank you for that. I will send this over to you, Catherine, so you can share it with the crew. But I just included some resources here if people are curious about this, or if people come to you and ask for resources, you can kind of just regurgitate and send this to others. So I'm not going to go through each of these. Choose what you like. Some of these are obviously geared towards women. I just felt more called to that. But one in particular that I felt was really scientifically backed and helped me understand the addiction to dopamine, which is a big part of drinking, was Dopamine Nation. And that's not necessarily just about drinking. So it's kind of addiction at large. So I highly recommend that if you're a leader to understand that. Anyways, so yeah, you can reach out to me. My email is emily@emilyholland.co. Again, I'll share this so you can, I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn and nothing else, purposefully. And yeah, feel free to reach out to me there. I'm probably most active on LinkedIn as far as the two platforms go. But I'm so glad you invited me to do this, Catherine, and really passionate about it. I'm stoked that we were able to make it work.
It's lovely. And also, just for those of you who are joining us now, Emily will also be presenting a discussion next month about how to start your own podcast, because this is something that's really starting to gain traction in the sales and marketing communities. And we want to make sure that you all feel empowered to do that as well. So friend of Pi, definitely always welcome back, Emily. We're very happy to have you today. Thank you to everybody who joined us. And thanks to everybody who is watching this on the recording, which you will be receiving in your emails. And this is also available on the Proposal Industry Experts platform for you to be able to access in the future. So Emily, we're so glad that you're here. We can't wait for everybody else to check in. And as usual, we will be having weekly webinar and educational seminars. So don't be shy. Check out our calendar and event schedule, and please make sure that you're ready to rock and roll for the next event. We can't wait to see you there. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.